I want you to know that you've got this. Don't let nobody tell you any different. This is your world, and this is your life, so just live it. You deserve to be happy like everyone else. Look in the mirror, you've got this. I can't say it no clearer. You've got this. You can do it, you've got this. Just stay true, cause you've got this.
I'd like to welcome you to the first session of Ask an Autistic. Thank you very much for being here. It's our intention to hold these sessions as a way to involve both autistic and non-autistic voices in a community event that helps find common ground and understanding. For a long time, the voices of autistic adults have been systematically silenced or ignored. Often people are surprised to find out that there is such a thing as an autistic adult, as if autism suddenly and magically disappears at the age of 18 or 21. We do exist, and very proudly so. It's time for us to express our voices and be heard. It's time for therapies and interventions claimed to help autistic people to actively involve us and not only permit us to contribute to the conversation, but to lead it. To provide therapy without involvement of the people for whom that therapy is directed is not only unconscionable, it's unethical. As autistic adults, we invite you to this table, and we're very grateful to have you here as our invited guests to talk about your autistic children with us and share your experiences with our expertise in what it means to be autistic. We hope that these conversations will lead to greater understanding, respect, and involvement in improving and celebrating the lives of autistic people, no matter what age or circumstance. So with that, I'd like to move on to introductions. My name is Dr. Rebecca Evanco. I'm the co-founder of Wilderwood, a 9-month program designed for autistic adults by autistic adults. I'm autistic. I have a PhD in cognitive linguistics, 3 children, and I'm a board-certified cognitive specialist. I'm also your moderator for Ask an Autistic. We're very grateful for the assistance of our special projects volunteer, Zia Telfair, who met you at the gate. And we also welcome another one of our volunteer from Wilderwood, Anna Maria McCann. Finally, I'd like to introduce our panel. We're delighted to have such a strong representation of experience and expertise, ranging from autistic parenting to teaching to work and professional life. And I'd like to thank the panelists for their time, dedication, and expertise. So our first panelist is Shireen Crow. Shireen is autistic with ADHD and the parent of an autistic ADHD child. As an autism ADHD coach and advocate, Shireen is a wealth of information with many resources and ideas. She's open to parents communicating with her directly, and Shireen's card with her contact information is on the table over here. Jocelyn Maestas is autistic and the author of the blog Autistic in Teaching, and one of the hosts of the autistic-led and run podcast, Autism Talk, Real Autistic Voices, led by real autistic women. Jocelyn is an ardent advocate for autistics. As both an autistic adult and a teacher, Jocelyn strives to bring together 2 worlds where autism acceptance is key and the autistic community is heard. Misty McCulloch is autistic and is employed in a managerial capacity in the medical field. She is an articulate advocate for autistic adults and is acutely aware of issues facing autistic people in the workplace. Thank you to all of you, too, for attending and your interest in learning more about autism from autistic people themselves. I'd also like to thank you for your donations to Wilderwood, which is only one of 2 New Mexico charities that is led, designed, and created for autistic adults by autistic adults. The other is Ocade Cliffs, an autistic-led retreat and workspace in northern New Mexico, and we're sending greetings to Star Ford, who runs that excellent and beautiful facility. Hi, Star. Question 1. What do you all mean by the phrase spoons?
It was originally meant about chronic illness. It was a story about someone who wanted to share with her friend what it was like. And they were out at a restaurant, and she had lupus, and she said, with my lupus, I wake up in the morning and you have spoons. Because she just reached over to another table and grabbed some spoons and handed him and said, this is what you start with each day. Now everything you do takes spoons. And so doing your hair, brushing your teeth, having to do different things takes spoons, and you have a limited amount. And with autism, it seems like it's meant more in a emotional and mental capacity of the cognitive that it takes, of the stimulation that you have to deal with.
The second question, why don't autistic people like the puzzle symbol?
So part of it has to do with Autism Speaks and how we feel that Autism Speaks is a hate group towards autistics. And we're not a puzzle to begin with. We are not puzzling, or there's not a piece of us that is missing. I actually, on my blog, polled autistic people, and with 8,000 autistic adults answering this question, 93% of them found insult with the puzzle, and they actually preferred the autistic made symbol of the infinity symbol.
Okay, this one is, how can I get my autistic child with ADHD to follow directions?
When I was a child, what helped with me is lists. If my mom wanted me to follow instructions, she would give me a list, and she would give me things that I needed to do, and she wouldn't really tell me that I had to do it by a certain time. She would just say, this is what you have to do today, get it done. And she would check in with me every once in a while. Sometimes I would find it very annoying or patronizing that she was checking in, especially because I'm like, I know I have this list. But, it was kind of also a reminder of, hey, I want you to get this done. You're going to get it done today. That's my deadline. So just checking in. And even as an adult, I've kind of followed through with that. Like, I have to get these things done today. It's my to-do list. So I think that would be a good thing to have them do, is give them a list. This is what they have to do. This is their instructions.
Yeah, I agree. That definitely, it helps to lists. I agree. I was later diagnosed, but I've since adopted lists throughout my life like crazy and I check mark them off, and there's some satisfaction to it all. Mm-hmm. And as a kid, I didn't have that kind of, I wasn't given that kind of stuff like you were, and I feel like that would have been super beneficial to have checklists of things to do and stuff like that. Because I am someone with autism and ADHD as well.
I guess the thing I would mention is with just autism, I feel like a list can help, but sometimes with ADHD, it's hard to self-manage and prioritize. So you have to first teach how to self-manage the list. But in the beginning, and like with my son, I'll write down the whole list and give it to him or show it to him. But then it is kind of a one at a time thing. So I'll show him the list, but then I'll just tell him one thing, because otherwise he'll get overwhelmed with the whole list and kind of where to start. So I think definitely written can help, as can one at a time doing it. The other thing that helps is a routine. So if children learn that this is the routine, it's easier. And the other thing, especially with ADHD, but I think also with autism, it is a visual schedule. So you can see there's apps that do it, or you can get things that you put on the wall, but it shows what you're doing at what time so that you're aware. And the last thing I would mention is with instructions, when you give it to them, make sure you have their attention, which is probably on the last thing they were doing. So my son is in occupational therapy, and they taught us, transitions are hard, both with ADHD and autism. And so to give a heads up on what's coming, and then, okay, it's that time now, really helps him, and then he has a couple minutes until I give the next direction, so it's not trying to talk to him when his focus isn't there.
I worry about my son who has meltdown and behavior issues. How is he going to handle life in the real world? I'm going to hand that over to the panel, but I do have something to say about this. The way he handles life is his real world. It's not something that he has to kind of, somehow transition into, like he's not in the real world. The way he perceives the world is his world, and I think that that's a great place to start. Panelists, would you like to take that question on?
I can. So I want to make sure that whoever this is meltdown and behavior issues are totally separate things. That meltdown is not a behavior issue. But secondly, I had meltdown issues as a child, and I also was a very sassy child. So when I would have a meltdown, my mom literally had to figure out what was causing that meltdown so it could stop.
There's a method of dealing with children and behavior issues that comes from a book called The Explosive Child, which, contrary to the title, it's not just for explosive children, and it's based on the idea that kids do well when they can, and when kids aren't doing well, it means there's skills lagging. It means there's something lacking that or not lacking, but there's something that needs help, that needs addressed. I just also want to mention the theory that's in that book is called Plan B, and it basically means where to identify where the behavior is coming from, what skills are lacking. And once you do that, then you can work on it. But basically, it's working with your child, not like you're an opponent, but like you're a team together. And it brings the child into the reason for the behavior and kind of goes through how to determine that. But I found that really helpful with my son.
Another question is, how do I tell my child that he or she is autistic?
I have a experience where I was diagnosed in 2nd grade, and the doctor recommended to my mom to not tell me due to the fact that I miss honesty, so I would have blurted it out at school. And being diagnosed in the 90s, it wasn't a very great time for autistic. So the doctor recommended that to save me from the torturous place that they would have put me, to not tell me and not tell the school. Therefore, I did not know until I was an adult, learning in my education program that autism was a thing, and I was like, Mom, this kind of sounds more like me than ADHD, which the school diagnosed me with wrongly. And my mom was like, you're going to hate me. And I was like, why? She goes, because that is you. And I'm like, oh. And I had a diagnosis of ADHD, but I never fit in with my friends who also had ADHD. It was because that wasn't my true diagnosis, so I even felt ostracized. So my advice is tell them. Tell them that it's a good thing, and don't tell them, don't be that what my mom and the doctor feel. Don't make it this horrible thing that schools used to make it, because it isn't. Autism is great, and there's a great community of autistic adults out there and autistic people. So
I didn't know growing up that I was autistic or ADHD, but I always knew something was different. I always knew that I didn't fit in. So whether they know or not, they're smart enough to know that they're different. And knowing why, I feel like, would have helped me in a lot of ways.
I completely agree. Because I didn't know until I was an adult. And I probably I actually definitely would have benefited from knowing early on in life, just because I did know I was always different, but I didn't know why. And it was like kind of not, I felt like a piece of myself wasn't complete because I didn't know 100% what was going on with me.
Next question, I'm worried about my autistic child not being able to be independent, have a job, get married, or find a partner. Is it challenging to have meaningful relationships with significant others as an autistic person?
I think to some degree, relationships are a challenge regardless whether you're autistic or not. I mean, yes, it's challenging, but the challenges are different. There are some things that are easier and there are some things that are harder. As for being able to be independent, have a job, get married, or find a partner, I don't see that there's any reason they wouldn't be able to do that. Because I had trouble growing up and I turned out what I think is okay. And I have a son, I take care of my things, I've had partner. It's nothing to say that you can or can't. That's just kind of a case-by-case situation.
I wouldn't be worried about them being able to be independent or have a job because I'm independent. Some people are semi-independent, and that's okay too. But I'm also a teacher, and I'm getting my master's degree, and and then the other thing I want to mention is them not getting married isn't the end be all end all either, or having a partner. There are some people who are asexual and demisexual, and that's okay too. So, and being a mod for a quite large autistic Facebook group, there are a lot of autistic adults who end up finding out that they are asexual or demisexual, where they don't really want a partner, or they don't find a partner unless they are romantic, emotionally attached. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think I'd also mention that, let me preface this, I'm disabled. I have multiple physical disabilities. I'm on disability. So I don't have a job, but I don't feel like my worth is only by having a job. I feel like there's lots of ways that you can make life meaningful and have purpose without necessarily being able to make money.
Yeah, I mean, I've been independent most of my life. I've been on my own since I was 15. So I've always had a job. So I don't think that's going to be an issue, or, I mean, that's any more of an issue than with a neurotypical person. I've had partners. I have a partner now that I've been with for 5 years. So it's definitely possible to have meaningful relationships. You just have to find that person, find a person that's willing to work and, be patient with you, as with anyone, really. But yeah, it's definitely all possible. A lot of us here, we're all independent up here, so I feel like it's definitely possible.
Thought I'd mention too, be okay with our job not looking the way that you expect it to look. Often autistic and ADHD children will grow up to be adults who find what they're good at and find a way to make money from it. So it might not be a 9-to-5 job, it might not be a social job, it could be. It really just depends on the child and what they want to do.
So what resources do you wish you would have had in school to make your disability easier to cope with?
With my son, I know the one thing that's been helpful and that I've seen online mentioned a lot is educating the staff and students, because education can stop some of the bullying and taking on and being the different child, when it's just, this is just the way the brain is and there's nothing wrong with it.
Having grown up where they didn't tell the school the school assumed it was ADHD because they wrongly diagnosed me. And because my mom didn't put me on medicine because I didn't have ADHD, the teacher assumed that all my misbehaviors and meltdowns I was having was because I was a horrible kid that was just not medicated. And she ended up telling my mom that I deserved to go into a home because I was a burden to her, burden to society, and burden to the classroom.
Oh my God.
In front of me at a student-led conference, you know, the conference that you're supposed to be as a child telling your mom all the great things you're doing. She stopped me so she could tell my mom that I was horrible. But I've seen through my own students that their parents come in, or they now that they're in middle school, they actually do it themselves. They come in and tell their peers that they're autistic and what it means and what they'll do. And things that I never would see from my own peers, I see from their peers, giving them the support that they need because they told them this is what they need. And sometimes they'll advocate, they're like, I'm about to melt down because you guys are being so loud. Please be quiet. And I'm like, you advocated for yourself? And your peers are okay with that? In my childhood, I would never imagine that to be possible.
And ABA therapy is considered the gold standard for, quote, treatment of autistic children. And the question that we have asked of us is, what do you think about ABA therapy?
So the issue with ABA therapy, well, there's a lot of issues, but it's basically trying to train your child to act more neurotypical, to stop behaviors that are seen as, that make you different, or that other people are impacted by your meltdowns or your issues. And they use both the positive rewards and punishments as well, so aversive techniques. Behaviors were extinguished, they were not allowed, or you would get in trouble. And then positive rewards were connected, like for instance an ABA therapist might use food as the reward, a candy or something. Behavior is communication, and with ABA you're trying to stop the behavior, but you're stopping the communication. So if there is a behavior, figure out what it's trying to communicate.
I actually, on my blog, again, did a poll. I do lots of polls on my blog, if you haven't realized yet. But with this one, oops, I lost it. But with this one, 97.6% of autistics think that ABA therapy was abusive towards them when they went through it as a child. So with that number alone, to me, that shows that it's not doing a great job in it's actually causing trauma in autistics as they grow up.
I think the fundamental problem with ABA therapy is that it takes the neurotypical or non-autistic perspective as being normal, and therefore anything that doesn't match that is immediately abnormal. Whereas if you inverted that and took the autistic perspective as normal, the non-autistic world would look very, very strange to us. The typical rewards like star charts or candy or iPad time, or it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense to us because we're not wired that way. Appeal to our logic. Appeal to our sense of right and wrong. That's the way you're going to reach an autistic child. So this thing about candy or immediate rewards, it all just seems a bit hollow to us. It feels fake and artificial. Ask us to jump, how high? It's all a bit Pavlovian. Here's your reward. We're typically more interested in hearing a logical explanation and appealing to us that way, as well as an appreciation and understanding that this non-autistic world is really difficult for us at times. And I think if parents can start to look at their children through the eyes of how their children are seeing the world, they might be able to better understand them, rather than this kind of superficial, here's a reward if you behave in a certain way. Now jump, how high?
What I wanted to say was a quote by one of the creators who created ABA therapy, along with saying, not only did he create ABA therapy, but he created gay conversion therapy, and he used gay conversion therapy as one of his ideas of how to create ABA therapy for autistics, which is quite funny to me that in many states, gay conversion therapy is illegal to even practice, where in that same state, ABA therapy is okay. So what does that say about that place that is okay with saying, hey, this is bad to do on people, but hey, let's do it on disabled people because, you know. But the quote that I want to mention that he said was, you see, you start pretty much from scratch when you have an autistic child. You have a person in a physical sense. They have hair, nose, and a mouth, but they are not people in a psychological sense. One way to look at the job of helping an autistic kid is to see it as a matter of constructing a person. You have the raw materials, but you have to build the person. Avar Lavas.
Kids, of course, will be kids, but with my son, I always give him the benefit of the doubt because I was never believed, and that led to a lot of issues. And so I would rather believe my son that this is how his autism is presenting rather than label it a thing of will that he needs to be broken down.
I would think to look at what's happening around the situation. Like, there's a lot of loud noises, a lot of, I don't know, maybe they were bullied that day, that they're just spent, or they're just tired from school for that day, and then they're just lashing out at little things. Then I would take it as, okay, that's probably they're on the verge of meltdown, or they're currently melting down, and it's just the start of the meltdown. And I would also look at, are they purposely doing it? Like, thinking back when I was a kid and I was messing with my siblings, when I planned to misbehave, I planned to misbehave. I was going to go down that hill and get in trouble, and I knew it. So I was going to get in trouble the biggest way possible. So I think, is it purposeful?
I would also add, again, behavior is communication. If they are seeming a little out of control or have behavior going on, especially after school, that behavior is a communication that they're not emotionally regulated very well. One of the ways that helps my son with this is there's this book, Sensory Smarts, that's the name of the book, and they have what's called a sensory diet, and it basically means if you know that your child is stressed in this situation or it isn't regulating well, make sure that you're meeting their sensory needs, because that's often what helps with the emotional regulation. So whether that is playing with lime or digging in sand or
Doing the tapping ones.
yes. Yes, having something, and then also to encourage stimming, self-stimulatory behavior, because that's also how we self-regulate. And so to encourage that is encouraging having coping skills to deal with your emotions and emotional regulation.
Yep. I think too is talk to your child if they are coming home and melting down. Maybe even though it's in their IEP, the school's not following it. From my blog, parents come to my blog all the time and ask questions, saying that their child is saying that this isn't happening at school. Believe them. If they're saying, hey, I know that I'm supposed to have a break if I feel like I need one, and they're not giving it to me, or they're making me wait until the very end of the day to take all of my breaks in one lump sum instead of sporadically throughout the day, listen to them. If they're probably most likely telling you the truth that the school is not following their IEP plan, and then as a parent, you can call an IEP meeting.
Reminds me of when I went over to some place that was offering ABA therapy, And I walked into the place and I noticed that there were fluorescent lights going. And I said, doesn't the fluorescent lights bother the kids? Mm-hmm. And the answer I got was, well, they're going to have to get used to it, so we're just doing sort of like immersive therapy here. Mm-hmm. It would be like me going into a classroom where there's one of those old-fashioned chalkboards and I'm running my fingernails down on it. It's like, that's what it's like. How can your parents and extended families help you cope with your disability?
Believe your child, learn about the disability, and ask questions. So to ask them to really get their input on what's bugging you, what maybe can I do to help. Growing up, I didn't know that tags weren't supposed to bother you, and they always bothered me in my clothes.
Like
and
a
I
cactus.
just didn't say anything because I thought, well, everybody has to deal with it.
Seek out other autistics because they're going to know autism better because they live it. It's their lived experience.
And growing up, I had a really hard time doing things that didn't make sense to me. And it would often sound like arguing when I was clarifying or asking for more information.
My mom would tell me, stop messing with your brother. Why? Because I said so. That never worked. Like,
Yeah.
Why do I have to stop messing with him? He messes with me.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's her telling me, because he's your little brother and you need to model being a big sister. Just because he messes with you doesn't mean you need to hit him back. You're the older one. You have to be the mature one. And that was like, oh, okay, I'm the big kid. Okay, yay. So,
okay, the last question. We have to check my son's backpack every morning and evening because he has sticky fingers. I guess that means, when I first read that, I thought, what's he been eating something sweet? Very literal, very literal. But no, apparently it means that he steals things. How can we deal with this? Interesting question.
Having him or checking his backpack, give him a chance to say, hey, I have something. So start giving him opportunities to build trust and explain how you lose trust. And I think if you have to, don't protect your child from consequences. Sometimes just letting the natural consequences happen can be enough for them and also teach them an important lesson about consequences.
Another approach too is, generally speaking, most autistic people are extremely honest, brutally honest, because we do tend to see the world as either black or white. It either is or it isn't.
there's no gray.
No gray. So, one strategy might be to appeal to, your son's sense of rightness and fairness and honesty and say, one of the things I really admire most about you is how honest you are. You would never steal. I love that about you, and I think that is wonderful. And all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I am honest. I don't steal. I wouldn't steal. Just because your child is autistic does not mean that he or she does not have to learn natural consequences.
And
there's a difference between accommodations and consequences. There are still consequences. You can accommodate the needs, but you don't necessarily just say, well, you get away with everything because you're autistic.
We're in a slightly little different situation in that we do homeschool, so we can make accommodations that are a lot easier, but we're limited in social. And I have a teenager, and he wants a friend so desperately, and it's hard to find someone who understands.
The app Meetup has some great groups that you find common interests.
Yep. I know that's what my mom would do, is my poor mother. But I had so many interests as a kid. I wanted to be a ballerina, and she took me to ballet. I wanted to be a writer. She put me in writing workshops, and when I wanted to be a rollerblader, she put me in rollerblading classes. And I had friends from each of those circles. I'd never really met them outside of those areas. It was just those friends in those places. But my writing obsession actually is one of the reasons I became a teacher, and it followed me through there. And I actually found a writing group online where we got to swap stories. One of those girls is still one of my best friends that I speak to all the time. We've never met,
Right.
but
That's so weird.
we've never met. And she's autistic too, and we are great friends, and we share things all the time. And both our parents are always like, you know what, you should really go down. Her mom tells her, you should really go down to New Mexico. And my mom's always like, you should really go up to Michigan. And I'm like, yeah, I just don't want to get on a plane. And she's like, I don't want to get on a plane either. So, but we're the best of friends. We've been friends since middle school, and it's all been online. And
But I also had different relationships. So I had really close relationships with adults.
I think,
And
yeah.
being able to understand that unfortunately we can't take everything away from our kids that they have to deal with.
Right.
But there is a lot of room that they can grow by the time they become an adult. And I feel like I've met people that have been wonderful people, and I wouldn't be in the position I'm in were it not for the childhood I had.
I think I had a lot of adult friendships too. I think that's weirdly an autistic thing, is being a kid and having adult friendships.
Yeah, very much so.
My mom had me volunteer a lot because she really wanted me to see the community as a whole, the bad and the good. And she had me at a retirement home, and I think some of the best memories I have as a child is from that retirement home of elderly folks telling me their stories, and I consider them my best friends back then. And so I think that was a very good thing for me, because it also taught me to be kind of social in different environments. Because like this guy that was in the Holocaust, I was at a Jewish retirement home. His socialization was different than mine, but it was also different from others, because he had the experience of actually being in a concentration camp, and his was different than the other elderly people versus someone who was an elderly person that was from the 30s. Her social rules were different than his, and it's I think to me that taught me that society's rules change a lot from person to person. I just have to learn what they want.
When I was about 11, my mother put me into some kind of summer camp thing with a lot of other kids, because she said, oh, she'll love it. There's lots of other kids her age, and she'll be able to play. And, well, of course, I hated it and ended up sort of in a corner somewhere. But I found that there was this little door out of this huge room where all these kids were doing these goofy things, and I ended up in the office of this Catholic charity. And the woman who was working as the admin person there took a liking to me and got me to sit in front of the old switchboard. It was one of these pull switch ones where you could sort of connect people with cords. Oh my God, I loved it. And I loved being with her. She was an older lady, and I loved all the older people and the nuns who were there. And I ended up, sitting there on that switchboard at 11 years old, putting these calls through.
Partially it comes back to expectations, both your expectations and your son's expectations on, if you expect that your life is going to look a certain way, then you obviously get disappointed when it doesn't. But if you just enjoy the life you have, if you can look for the connections you do have, the relationships you do have, it might not look the typical way, but that doesn't mean it's not fulfilling.